So if that turns out to be the happiness that's available for the human being, peace of mind regardless of the circumstance, it means that our belief that our happiness is to be found in circumstance needs to be dissolved. Because for as long as the belief is that my happiness is to be found in circumstance, as long as that's deeply in place, how can we be at peace regardless of the circumstance that we find ourselves in? Essentially, the belief is saying that my happiness will be there, and happiness sort of equates to my completeness. My completeness will be there when life looks a certain way. So how can we be at peace when life isn't lining up with our idea of completeness? So there really needs to be a recognition, actually my completeness isn't dependent on something out there in the future. My completeness is independent of circumstance. Now, if that recognition starts to happen, it makes sense that it's therefore possible to be at peace with the circumstance. So we tend to have a self-image, an idea of who we are that's been put in place by life, and that idea says, I am someone that requires things to be a certain way in order to be complete. Now, if what we are at our core is very different to that, we are not someone or something that requires circumstance to look a certain way in order to be complete, then we have a self-image of ourselves that is out of line with what we truly are. So it means we don't know ourselves. If we knew ourselves, we wouldn't have a self-image that is out of line with the self that we know. So on this premise, if we draw the conclusion, I have forgotten myself, I have forgotten the core of who I am, and I'm running around with a belief about who I am, of course I'm going to feel uncomfortable in life. It's not going to fit properly. Like trying to put a 3-fingered glove onto a 5-fingered hand. So if we ask this question, what am I really looking for? And we hear the pointers. What we're looking for is happiness, happiness in the form of peace of mind, and peace of mind is the absence of suffering. Then we need to start investigating, is this true? Is this correct? And one way that we can start to verify this is that we check in each moment when we can be quite certain. We can put our hand on our heart and say, in this moment I'm not happy, from our own experience. And we allow the experience to tell us whether we're happy or not. And in a particular moment, when you say, in this moment I'm not happy, we need to investigate what's present. And the suggestion is that as you investigate, you'll find that what is present in that moment is a form of suffering. And it's that suffering that is what is allowing us to know I am not happy in this moment. So as we start to see time and time again that the times when I can say I'm not happy are the times when suffering is present. So then we know, okay, my unhappiness is suffering. Therefore it starts to make sense that, well, maybe my happiness is the end of suffering. the absence of suffering. This becomes a conclusion, a deduction that we can make for ourselves based on an investigation of our own experience. So if we become clear that my happiness is the end of suffering, my unhappiness is the presence of suffering, and then we start looking at that suffering and we see it's always my attitude to the circumstance. So that means that someone has crashed into your car. You go down to the car park and it's all smashed up. That's circumstance. And it's what we could say pain in the moment. And then what's likely to arise, because there is pain in the moment, is a certain form of suffering based on our deeply ingrained beliefs about who we are and what life is. And so if that suffering is seen, we'll see that, yes, my car has been damaged. That is pain, financial pain, and inconvenience pain. But the uncomfortableness on top of that pain is not due to the circumstance, but due to my attitude to the circumstance. So there could be a load of blame towards the person that did that. A load of guilt for not having parked it in the garage where you know it would have been safe, but you didn't feel like doing it. And that's the load of uncomfortableness on top of the circumstantial pleasure or pain. So if we start to see this more and more clearly, we become more and more clear on the dynamics of our unhappiness. And furthermore, if we start to see that the other is part of life and that this circumstance is part of life and had to happen this way, then that suffering starts to have less ground to stand on. So the investigation is something that happens as we become more and more equipped to look at what is happening in more detail. And that investigation has the ability to start changing our attitude from the attitude that causes suffering to the dissolution of that attitude. And the dissolution of the attitude essentially means remaining quiet. And as we remain more and more quiet, we get more and more in touch with a part of ourself that isn't affected by the fact that my car has been smashed.